right. Hello. Hola, mi gente. I am Brianna Davis. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Esperanza de Texas, Inc. I'm so excited for our first Café con Esperanza podcast episode today. Today we have Margot Martinez with Mujeres Unidas and Dr. Louis Whitebear with Oregon State University. Today's episode, we'll be discussing ending mental health stigma in Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities. So grab some cafecito, and remember, our coffee comes with hope. So let's get into our first question. Thank you so much for joining us today. So please introduce yourself and provide some information about your profession and the work you do in the community.
My name is Margot Martinez. I work with Women Together, Mujeres Unidas, and we help survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Some of the services that we provide include emergency shelter if the person feels that their life is in danger. We also have counseling, so brief counseling sessions for both survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And we also have very low-cost housing. And last, we have legal advocacy. So we're able to provide some information as far as their rights and maybe some help with divorce. Something that I have the privilege of doing is going out into the community and speaking about prevention and awareness of sexual assaults. And we also provide a companionment to hospitals when a person has been sexually assaulted. When they get what's called the SANE exam, I have the privilege of providing peer support services.
Wow, that's really some impactful work that you guys do.
Thank you.
Dr. Whitebear?
Yeah, my name is Louis Whitebear. I'm Kutzalban Shumash, and I am the assistant director at the Native American Longhouse, Ina House at Oregon State University. I also teach some of the Indigenous Studies classes on campus. And basically what I do is I work with students attending OSU and supervise them. I help take care of the Cultural Resource Center and that we're housed in, and also provide mentorship with students directly. I'm an advisor for different student organizations as well, so I advise like our Native Club. I advise some of our Greek organizations too, like Gamma Alpha Omega and Alpha Pi Omega as well. And so I'm pretty involved on campus with students and do a lot of one-on-one mentorship with them. And then in the community, I do a lot of advocacy work around murdered and missing Indigenous women, and helping with community-based work on breaking silences around things like sexual assault and that types of stuff. So that's more of my community-based work.
Wow. We are just very honored to have you, both of you all. So I know y'all touched, briefly on this. I know with you, Margot, so the question that I have is, does your job involve working directly in mental health or advocating for those who have mental health issues?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, we have the privilege of going out into the community and spreading awareness about sexual assault, spreading awareness about prevention, and so that way we can prevent, longer term sexual assault from occurring. If we're able to educate the public and have them be aware that it's okay for them to speak out and that there are services available for them, it might prevent them from experiencing sexual assault, continuous sexual assault, right? We also have the privilege of going to the hospital and providing that accompaniment with them while they're taking the SANE exam. And what we do is we go ahead and we're with them when they're taking the exam and try and let them know that, or help them understand that it wasn't their fault, and that we're there to support them in the case that they need counseling or further help.
Go ahead, Lou.
So some of the stuff that I am working with in regards to mental health and advocacy, it's more around helping the students I work with understand that it's okay to ask for help, and connecting them with counseling and psychological services on campus. That's not work I do directly. I'm there to mentor and listen, and sometimes talk through things and be a support person. But if they need direct mental health services, I definitely work on connecting them with the right people. I think a lot of it has to do with acknowledging the impacts of settler colonialism and what intergenerational and historic trauma is, and helping not just the students that I work with, but colleagues understand that that experience is very unique for Indigenous students, and how that impacts their perceptions about being able to even ask for help. And so some of it has to do more with that level of advocacy of connecting people and creating an atmosphere in the center itself where people feel it's okay to say, like, hey, I'm having a bad day, or telling student staff, if you need to take a day off to do that, like, just do that. It's okay. And the work will still be here. You have your peers here that'll pick up the work while you need time off. And so it's just creating more of that atmosphere where they feel like that's okay. And sometimes that's the first time folk have been told that they can't ask for mental health support. And so I think that's a big part of it in breaking stereotypes, and also in helping do the advocacy work.
Margot, I think when you were talking, it was very much when you kept saying it was a privilege. And I think that is so big, because the people that you are working with are dealing with this traumatic event, stuff that is so, it changes your life in so many ways. So when you're saying that it's a privilege to accompany them and do this work with them, I think that that word is so meaningful, because often sometimes you see people and they're like, well, it's my job, so it's what I got to do. But I really loved how you use that word. And Dr. Whitebear, I really appreciated when you were saying that you have these conversations with your colleagues, because often I know my personal experiences in school when I was dealing with maybe professors or people on campus that didn't look like me or couldn't relate to me. They didn't understand the cultural aspect of what I was going through and how that affected me. And often we see that our students are really, really traumatized because they get turned down, or they get really turned off to not wanting to seek the help or speak to people about it. So I really just commend both of y'all for the work that y'all are doing. Y'all are making a big difference in y'all's communities. So thank you so much. The next question that I have, the pandemic we're all currently battling together has heavily affected minority communities. We have seen in the news the effects of social isolation. It has increased self-harm, suicides, domestic violence, and abuse towards children. What are some things you feel we as a community, local, state, and national officials can do to be more supportive and provide that preventative care?
For me, I believe in the old saying that knowledge is power. And what I mean by that is that everyone in the community, our mental health professionals or those who work in the and other health professionals, to spread awareness about the community services that are available in their county, in their cities. And so by doing that, we'll be able to give access, give these individuals access to this information, letting them know that if they do need help with domestic violence or sexual assault or depression or whatever the case is, there is services available to them. I am going to disclose a little bit here, but my mother is, going to a liver specialist. And while her job is to go ahead and look at her liver and take care of her liver, this liver specialist also asks about her mental health, also asks if she's going through domestic violence, also asks if she's experienced any other trauma recently. And so if we all implement this type of mentality into organizations, not asking just questions that pertain to our workforce or whatever we are doing, but also whether they need help in general in other aspects of their life, we can help by promoting and getting people to get more help. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think a holistic approach is very much needed these days. I myself see it when I go to the doctor. because our mental health, there's also somatic symptoms that can occur when you're experiencing mental health issues. And sometimes people just definitely, they don't know that. They don't have that education. So I think it's really great that we're seeing healthcare providers across the board taking a holistic approach to care. Dr. Whitebear.
Yeah, I was actually really worried about this part, especially like when the pandemic first hit and I started hearing about like the isolation and people having to stay home. It really weighed heavily on me, and I felt like I was so privileged to have a home where a home now where I don't have to think about like abusive situations and the strain of that on mental health, and knowing that there's kids that are in homes where they're not safe, and having children myself, and knowing that the schools had to like close down too, and those kids were facing not only the regular cycle of abuse they may face in the home, but also the added pressures that their parents had from having to help them with their schoolwork. And I was really afraid for those kids. I also am on our local school board here in Corvallis. And so that was one of my concerns that I voiced early on, is like, how are they going to have the support they need? And yeah, it is a big concern, especially those parts, and the isolation part, and being trapped in that space. I was just blown away by that thought. And also just having to process my own feelings of somewhat of guilt of being able to know that I'm okay while other people are not. And I think like coming from a community that's so like invested in its peoples, and I know we're all coming from those communities where it's like very family and very community based, like knowing that was like really heartbreaking. But one of the things that was really apparent too, especially from having that inside look into the way that schools operate, is that we rely so much on them for the mental health and for the help with disabilities and the food insecurity, and somewhere safe for these kids to be during the day. And it just really reminds me of how much society relies on the schools for all those things. And with like people not understanding why they can't open right now because of the pandemic, and that pressure of like, we need these services, we need them for daycares and that kind of thing. We just really need to reprioritize like everything. There's, if you think about how much we could be investing more in the schools, if that's the expectation, that schools are like places where social services are provided, then they need to be invested in more. And so I think like as communities and states and nationally, like that should be a wake-up call, and that more investment should be happening. There should be more than one mental health specialist in this giant school for these kids. There should be more community-based services for, in the case of extreme emergencies like we're in now, like there's nowhere for these families to get help. And I can go on and on about it, but that's like really one of the things that I really hope that society takes a better look at, is like, if there's an expectation, then we need to invest more in that, not just monetarily, but like as recognizing that, saying like, we do rely on you all in the schools for that. And since this question talked a lot on the impact towards children, and that's where I was focusing on, but just in general, like we really need to hold people accountable for also the cycles of abuse and stuff, and the understanding of people that can't get out of those cycles too.
Yeah, I know here in Corpus Christi, where I'm located, I would say, I think it was like in June, in 1 week alone, we had, I think it was 4 to 6 suicides in 1 week. And it really took me aback, because when I was hearing these families and I was hearing their stories, it was like, well, I tried to get help, but when I went, there was like a 2-month waiting list at the local mental health authority, or were on Medicaid and we didn't know that we could, seek services here or there, or we didn't have enough money to pay $175 to see someone at a private practice where we can get in a lot faster. So I completely agree. Another thing is, I know in some parts, at least here I can speak on in Texas, they don't even have social workers in the school. They have school counselors. And a lot of that is the academic portion is, weighing heavily on them. And they now have to be mental health professionals as well. So those are really great answers. Thank you, both of you guys. It's just right now heart-wrenching because, like you touched on, Dr. White Bear, we rely so much heavily on schools to provide that safe space. But I think also as communities, we need to come together to provide those safe spaces as well for our members of our communities. And I think also, like you said, owning what is going on and how can we help. I think another thing is, preventative care is so important. Often we see that people are getting care after they've been hospitalized, after there's been an attempt, after someone has attempted, or has engaged in self-harm. And it's so big because if we in schools, we have, your math, your reading, all these great subject matter that we teach, our children and young adults, but there's still so much of this stigma around mental health. Why are we not teaching our kids this? Why are we not letting them know that it's okay to have feelings? It's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to ask for help. But for some reason, we still very much steer very clear, very away from that because, oh no, it's very taboo. We don't want to talk about it. Or there's a mentality of often what I see, especially on social media, when people talk about mental health with children, is we don't want to put anything in their head. So I think that preventative aspect is so important. So we're not over here trying to figure out what to do when a tragedy strikes. We want to make sure that our kids are, they stay with us, right? That we're protecting them. So thank y'all so much for that. The next question, on the same token, essential workers have been on the front line since the pandemic has hit. Often we hear things like, it's their job, they signed up for this. How do you feel this affects their mental health? And how can we as a society better understand what they are going through and be more compassionate?
What I think is that we all just need to be able to get in their shoes and see it from their perspective. We're all weary about going to the supermarket or going to H-E-B or Walmart or whatever the case is and expose ourselves, right? And we are weary about taking our families out and maybe exposing ourselves and bringing that to our family. And so we need to be cognizant and aware that these workers are exposed to hundreds of these individuals, right? By either stocking our food or by working directly with these COVID patients. And so we also need to understand that although they might have chosen that profession or they signed up for it, right? We need to understand that, first of all, they might have chosen this profession before a worldwide epidemic was occurring, but also that these individuals can't, just from one day to another, quit their job. Leave their job, and what happens to their bills, what happens to their payments, that it's going to be stressful for them if they do leave their current work situation because they're not going to have money or income to pay their bills. And then it is mentally stressful, or it's just stressful for them to be working where they're working because of, the exposure and bringing that home. So I think we need to be more empathetic with these people who are putting their life on the line to make sure that we are able to get food, we are able to go to the grocery and buy certain products, and then also for those people who are taking care of us when we're on those medical beds.
When I think about the responses that are out there right now, whether it's they signed up for this and it's their job, or the way that people are treated for having to wear a mask, and like it's the worker's choice, right? Like, I think of the mental toll of that, and it's, I can't even imagine because I'm not in those shoes. But I think of the message that people are sending when they mistreat people, and they have those negative descriptions of them as like they're being viewed as expendable. And if you think about like what that message would send of being expendable, like that's rough. And so I operate from a lens of compassion, because you don't know why they chose the job they're in, whether they're a gas attendant, a grocery stocker, or if they're a doctor. Like, there shouldn't be value placed on the doctor over the gas attendant, right? Or the farm worker, but they're all being described in this way as being expendable for our convenience. And so that was something I had to grapple with too, being able to work from home. And it's like, I know there's other people that don't have that luxury like I do. And so treating people with respect became like a top priority for me. Or like when I go pick up groceries, like a lot of people yell at them for not having the right food, and like it's their fault, right? And so it's just really sad. And so I can't imagine having to put up with that all day. Or like working in the food industry, the one that bothered me the most was like here locally, and I know this happened in other cities too, is that people could still support local businesses by getting takeout from those restaurants, but they wanted to do this dine-in experience. And it wasn't so much supporting the local business that they missed. It wasn't the food they missed, because they had that option all along. It was being waited on and being served by somebody that they viewed as somewhat expendable. And that really bothered me. And I was like, do y'all realize like what you're saying, like the message you're sending to the people that work there? Like, that's jacked up. And so I hope that people understand like the message that they're sending to people when they're doing that, and that these are people. They're not just these workers. They're people. A lot of them have families. Some of them don't. And whether or not they have a family shouldn't put more value on whether or not they should be treated compassionately either. And so I can get a little bit ranty on that because of the lack of humanity in those responses. But yeah.
I think a humanitarian approach needs to happen. And I know I have a background before I started Esperanza. I've done mental health for about 10, 11 years. And for me, what concerns me, and I guess those that are not privy or in the field, is to a certain extent, I feel like these essential workers have post-traumatic stress, disorder. There's this, PTSD that is now occurring. We see it, teachers are being asked to come in and do their wills and update it and their benefits. We have seen doctors, farm workers, grocery workers, restaurant workers get COVID, die from COVID, get sick, and people just don't seem to care. There's not this compassion. There's not this approach to where that's a fellow human being. We're not considering what goes through their mind. You see videos of people who haven't even seen their children or their families in several months because they're an essential worker and they're so afraid to, infect their family. So I just think that an overall humanitarian approach and realizing that these people who are providing wonderful services to us before the pandemic and even now, that they themselves have feelings. They themselves are going through things. And right now, if a lot of us are feeling anxious and antsy because we're having to stay home, I can only imagine what their feelings are because they're such at risk. And they have the possibility of putting others at risk. So I just think an overall humanitarian approach, and just remember we're all human beings, speaks volumes. But thank you all for your amazing answers. I'm loving this. So I know we spoke about this in one of our previous questions, but this is going to go more in depth. So the pandemic has caused children, youth, and young adults to complete their schooling or college courses at home. Everyone's living situations are different. Some have smaller spaces, more relatives in the home, or lack of internet or access to technology. How does this impact their lives and mental health? What are some steps communities can take to ensure everyone has access to a fair education?
I am a student myself, and I have 3 nephews at home who are, which 2 of them are elementary school students. And so it was quite stressful sharing one computer, sharing one, the internet, which here in my household is pretty slow. So it was anxiety provoking, it was stressful, and many headaches were had. So I'm imagining that many students like myself were probably experiencing that anxiety from maybe not being able to have the same access to high power internet than when being at the university, right? Or having that bigger spaces when being able to go to the university and having a study room. I feel that one way that we can maybe provide a fair education, and something that I actually have been talking to the teacher of my nephews, is because we don't have that great internet and because we don't have several laptops, right? One thing is that we're trying to make it so here in my household, at least, they have their material in paper. So whatever it is that other students are required to do online, they're going to be doing in paper. And so I feel that may be one way that we can give access to those who come from maybe a low income household where they don't have those resources.
And also like the kids that are houseless, right? And students that are houseless. And I know like here in Oregon, pretty sure almost all the districts passed out like iPads and Chromebooks and stuff to their kids. A lot of the districts did. That's kind of like the thing right now with the students is they usually just use them in school, but they issued them to take home. But I was like, what if they don't have somewhere to charge it? And I was like, what if they don't have internet access? And they created a couple hotspots by some of the local schools, but then the kids still have to go over there. And they did that on campus too, where campus was closed, but they had like a small section and the Memorial Union converted so you can access Wi-Fi. And they brought like over a scanner from the library and stuff. And so they try to do some things, but there's still always going to be inequities with the online format of education. And like I taught spring, and so that was the first time we had to teach remote like that. And so like for me, it was really important to be flexible with the students. And I know not all instructors and faculty did that, which was really disappointing because it's not the students' fault there's a pandemic, right? And it's, if anything, you should be more compassionate and flexible in this time. And so like making sure that people knew that they can turn in their assignments late was important to me. Recording my synchronous part so they can asynchronously access it and things like that was some of the strategies that I used. And just literally every week being like, hey, I know there's a lot going on. If you need time, just reach out. If you need any extra help, let me know. Like every single week, almost every class, that constant reminder. And I did have students that were also parents, and they're like having to help their kids with homework too and share internet, the same thing. And just making sure like they knew they were supported. And they thanked me for that later on. And I found out from some of them that not all of their instructors did that. And I was like, wow, really? Like, that just makes sense. Like right now, it makes sense. The other thing I think that steps communities can do is, like, honestly, I think we need to just revamp education in this moment, because some of these requirements are not going to be met by kids. And so like, what does that mean for accessing college later on? what can colleges do now to help address this inequity that's going to exist in a couple years when kids are applying to college. And for the colleges too, like, they have to graduate. So how are they being accommodating and like changing requirements, and what does that look like? And so I'm just really interested in seeing how education is going to look moving forward, and knowing that this is likely going to be going on for not just the first couple weeks of fall, but farther. I mean, realistically, I highly doubt we're going to be back to normal anytime soon. And so like something has to change. And so people advocating for that change is really important, talking to people at the state level, not just the local level, because like the local people have to do what the state says. And so like, how do you contact your legislators? How do you contact Department of Educations and help advocate for change at that level is going to be really important coming up.
Definitely. One thing that I just saw, I'm not sure if it was yesterday or the day before, but the University of Houston had posted, you know, a lot of universities are trying to just really accommodate their students and be supportive. And they have posted, you know, like A and B grades will, you know, and C will be pass or fail. And then, you know, D and F will be such and such. And I went to the comments section, which I probably sometimes shouldn't do because then I get more upset. And I was really taken aback to some of the alumni and just people who were trying, I guess, to troll, just being very ugly and, you know, basically saying like they're watering down education and how dare they, you know, if they really wanted to work hard, they would make it happen. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like I when I was in college, I knew some students who were homeless. You know, like school was their sanctuary. They were there from as long as they could be. They would shower at the gym. You know, this is something that's real. And just I loved a comment that I saw from an actual student who was advocating and was saying, you know, right now we're in a pandemic. We didn't ask for this. Some of us can't even afford housing. We don't know what we're going to do, but we're still trying to get our education. So like basically let us live. And I think, you know, it really affects across the board, the young ones and the older ones, their mental health, because they start having these questions of, am I worthy? Am I good enough? They start feeling insecure about the situations that they're in when 99% of the time they don't have, it's not their fault. It's just, you know, it's what they're going through right now. What are we to tell young kids? Oh, you're homeless. You don't have internet. Oh, too bad. Like, how dare we, you know? And that's the approach that I see some adults taking. I see, you know, fellow people who are in college taking. And I think it really affects someone and it really makes them question their self-worth. It really causes anxiety and depression. And it makes me sad because, you know, I am someone who I dropped out of high school by the time I was, you know, 14 years old. I got my GED at 18. College was a real struggle for me. School was a real struggle for me. And I went through, you know, certain things that really affected my mental health and ultimately made me drop out of school. And I worry when I see these kids, you know, right now we're in a pandemic. No one asked for this. And so many questions come up, like Dr. Whitebear said, and you, Margot. I'm really curious to see how education will change because there needs to be a shift. So many students are just being failed by the system, period. And we need to own up to what that system is and really figure out, like Dr. Whitebear said, contacting our legislation, because making our voices heard so they know that we want equity education for everyone across the board. Everyone deserves a fair chance at education. So thank you all for those answers. The next question: in our Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities, there's a huge stigma surrounding mental health, therapy, and medication management for mental health illnesses. Why do you feel this occurs? And do you feel it's because of generational gaps and learned behavior?
This occurs because of what we've been taught as when we were younger, when we were kids. And it occurs because our communities may tend to associate these types of treatments for those who are weak-minded or for those who are crazy. And so we just need to bring more awareness that these types of therapy, any type of mental health, they're for anyone. They should be utilized by anyone who feels like they need to talk to somebody. We just need to normalize these types of treatments so that more people can have access to them. So I definitely feel that it is learned. It is definitely the expressions of lo que pasa en la casa se queda en la casa. What happens at home stays at home, right? We fix things at home and any of that. We hear that. And so when we experience something, we might associate, our feelings, or we might believe, I use sexual assault a lot, but it is something that the population I work with. So I experience sexual assault, but it's something I shouldn't talk about because, I'm not supposed to be talking about our things to other people. And so we just need to break down those taboos, and have those conversations and break down those barriers.
Right, and that role of silence, right, as a tool to oppress people, and the way that communities embrace it in a really unhealthy way to continue on those patterns, especially when it comes to sexual assault, but also when it comes to needing mental health treatment, or even to talk about it and say hey, I'm kind of depressed right now. I think I need some help. That's okay. And a lot of people don't think that. And some of it has to do, you have to think historically, having mental health issues was criminalized. People were institutionalized and still are for having mental health issues, but not in the same extent. And especially in communities of color, that happened a lot. And it happened with women more heavily too. And so just thinking about the way that mental health has been criminalized and how it's been used as this tool of to remove people's children. And there's a whole list of things where it's been used against communities, and especially thinking about Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities in particular, that has, I think, contributed to the silence about needing help, and also the generational piece too of that, that's passed on. And that stuffing down of these experiences has been passed down to as well. And so it's that's the learned behavior. You don't talk about it, like you were saying, it's something that there's silence built around structurally and then pulled in unintentionally, harming our own communities at the same time. And this perception of being weak if you can't handle it, right? And so I have a lot to say about that part too, but it's this, not only the fear part of if I need help, maybe people will think I'm unfit, to raise my children at this point. And that's been used particularly with women of color. And so there's just a lot. And so yeah, the generational gaps, the learned behavior, it all plays off each other. But I don't think people realize that there are some really specific reasons why those occur that were put in place, and it impacts today. And I feel there's been a little bit more. I feel the younger generation right now has been talking a little bit more about it and helping break that. And it's up to, I feel the generation that I'm a part of is kind of this bridge between with elders and young people of being they couldn't talk about it. You can talk about it. It took me a long time to talk about my own stuff. You know what I mean? And this is why I understand it's hard to talk about. And helping break those cycles. So I think like the breaking of the cycle part is really important.
I know myself, I have no problem talking about my mental health experiences. I think it's one of the things that has encouraged me to have these open and raw dialogues, because I think that they're needed. I think when people share their experiences, which a lot I notice in our culture, and just cultures in general, it's a very hush-hush taboo. You don't speak about it because what are people going to say? You know, I know in my family, that's what happened. I remember, you know, being about 12 years old and seeing a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist, you know, saying, you know, Brianna, you know, she has major depression disorder, and, you know, we're gonna have to put her on some antidepressants. And the response I got was like, what do you got to be depressed about, girl? I'm a veteran. I jumped out of a plane during blah, 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 and this, and that, and you don't see me depressed. And it's like, okay, like, and that stays with you. And then they put that onto you, and then it's like a learned thing, to where then it took me a while until I got into grad school and working through stuff that I went through in the past to realize it's okay. I need to talk about it. I don't need to suppress my feelings. So, yeah, I'm very excited with what I'm seeing. You know, I see Latinx therapy groups and Black therapy groups and Indigenous therapy groups, and people having like these amazing Facebook posts where they're just so raw and open about their experiences. And I'm like, yes, you know, because I genuinely feel when we see and hear that stuff, it resonates with us, and it makes us feel like, okay, even if you don't want to share your personal story, it can encourage someone to go get the help that they need, go seek treatment, go to therapy, whatever it might be. So, yeah, thank y'all for that. We're going to go more into culture. So there's really like a lack of cultural competency and understanding in mental health professionals. It can contribute to underdiagnosis or misdiagnosis of mental health illnesses in Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities. Some factors that contribute to this are language differences in patient and provider, stigma of mental illness among minority populations, and cultural presentation of symptoms. How can local mental health authorities, mental health organizations, hospitals, and private practices ensure their providers have the proper education and tools to serve communities properly and with understanding?
I think more than anything, it's training. I think just having somebody from our community or somebody from those populations where we might not have much experience, bringing them in and training the staff of that specific practice, training everyone, including from the secretary to the doctor to whoever's in charge, right? Having everyone receive these trainings where they learn about different cultures and they're learning about updated information, whatever the case is, just training is so important. And as far as language barriers, you know, we have access to the internet. We have access to translators from the other side of the world. So, you know, we just have to let these individuals know that those services are available. Oftentimes they may feel embarrassed to ask for an additional service. And so instead of saying, hey, I didn't understand that, they'll go home and they just won't receive the answers that they need. So having access in those centers of translators, or having access of also, you know, online translators where a translator can be had immediately, and can give those translations, just I feel is essential to providing appropriate care for our clients.
In regards to training, like you can train people all you want, but some people are just going to be like biased anyways, right? And so acknowledging that, and unfortunately that shows up in mental health care treatment as well. But some of the things I think that people think they can just do this one size fits all diversity training once a year or once in their life and they're good. Like, I know what I'm talking about now. Like, I know these things, right? That's not how it works. And like, I know recently I've seen advertisements like, oh, you can get a certificate in diversity, equity, and inclusion, like the DEI ones. I'm like, you can't just get certified. You have to put that into practice, right? Like, what are you doing? Like, how are you practicing it? And so, but some of the things that I do think that are missing out of those are, there's rarely specific trainings that talk about settler colonialism, anti-Blackness, right? And sometimes there's ones that talk about xenophobia, but not usually. And so those three things like are often missing out of training curriculums. And for mental health professionals, those are like really crucial, not only to understand where people are coming from and understand the experiences they may have had or that their families may have had, but also to recognize their own biases and recognize maybe I am like microaggressing this patient and didn't realize it based on a lack of understanding of these concepts. And like, they're not just concepts, they're lived experiences. Like, we live through these, right? Our communities do. And as far as language goes, one of the most damaging things I've seen up in this area is people making the assumption that because somebody is brown, they speak Spanish. And there's been so many people that have not received proper care because they come from Central America or Mexico talking or speaking in indigenous languages, and they think they're speaking gibberish is how it's described. And they're like, I don't know what's wrong with them. They're speaking gibberish. So they mistreat them, misdiagnose them when all they needed was somebody that spoke their language. And it's like really like, and that's a form of like lack of understanding of the diversity of like peoples, right? As they just make these assumptions. And so for that part, I think like the understanding, like there's so many languages around the world, and there's like, there's so many languages spoken by people that are often read as only speaking Spanish. And so, yeah, I think about that too, like how there needs to be more access to people that speak more languages to help folk out, and not just this expectation of, I have, like here in this area, they're like, well, we have a couple of different languages spoken, so we're good. And I'm like, no, you're not good. There's way more, there's way more than that. You can't expect them to all of a sudden be able to explain what's going on with them, or even understanding like the cultural aspects of what they're trying to describe, like is missing too. And so I would rather, instead of seeing more trainings, that they just hire people that know the communities, not just make an assumption based on their appearance, but like, do they know the communities? Like, do they have experience with them? And so that's where I think just the hiring in itself would be a step up too.
That's so important and so big. One of my first experiences in mental health, and it stays with me so much so to this day, is organizations or local mental health authorities assuming that because you're brown, that you speak Spanish. I don't speak Spanish well at all. And I remember being thrown in and having to do an intake for someone. And I remember telling my supervisor, like, I don't speak Spanish like that. And the response that I got was, but you understand it, right? And I said, yes, I understand it perfectly. I'm not able to articulate it back. I have difficulty really articulating it properly, you know, in a conversational setting. So they still made me do the intake. And it was a lot of, I understood what that person was saying, but it was a lot of me trying to Google words and put sentences together. And I did this, you know, I met this person, and I go back to staff with my supervisor, and I'm already feeling defeated because I feel like I'm not doing my best work because, you know, I don't speak Spanish like that. And I go back and I say, you know, this is really a cultural thing. This person is letting me know that they really believe that someone did brujeria on them, and y'all are trying to hospitalize this person because you feel like they're speaking to themselves and doing certain things, but they really feel like a spirit is, you know, following them. And I'm trying to explain to this supervisor the cultural aspect of it. And the response that I get is, you're a mental health professional. science comes first. And I'm just like, I'm not saying that. I'm just also trying to say that there needs to be an understanding the cultural aspect. And often we see supervisors that they don't believe that. We often see that, excuse me, hold on. Okay, so often we see also people just saying, okay, well, you can go ahead and do the interpretation. We don't need to pay someone to come in and do interpretation. And we see these employees just really feeling defeated and not being able to give their best care possible. So thank y'all for touching on that. Also, I think, I know Dr. Whitebear, you touched on the anti-Blackness. There's, in healthcare settings, I feel, and what I've seen and read is, for some reason, besides the anti-Blackness, a lot of healthcare professionals have this misconception of Black communities that they have a higher pain tolerance. They can take, certain things compared to other communities. Or often we see people have misconceptions about the Indigenous community as well in regards to their mental health or co-occurring disorders as well. Oh, you know what? It's just alcoholism. Like, how dare you just label, people and not really understand the cultural aspect, not really understand why some of these co-occurring disorders occur, not just because someone's Black, Latinx, or Indigenous. We're just going to put them in a box and assume that is it. The next question I have is, we know that minority populations have different experiences in healthcare settings. What kind of patient education needs to be provided for people to feel comfortable seeking care and properly navigate the healthcare system?
As far as educating our mental health providers, I think what's important is for them to let their patients know that they're there to serve them. Right. Oftentimes, they may see that, or they may believe that this professional or this individual is in some way above them or has more knowledge about them than they do. So more than anything is let them understand or let them know, the clients, that is, that they're there to serve them. They're there to help them. For the mental health provider to let the client know that, they have to work as a team and that the mental health provider is there to service them. Just letting them know that can make the process or make them feel more comfortable about interacting with that mental health provider. Just letting them know that they're there to service them can be the difference of that person maybe feeling more comfortable about going and seeking further treatment or going and continuing treatment.
And I would add in to have, as far as the patient education aspect, having materials that speak to communities. I mean, it's not like there's not that stuff in existence at this point. Like, there is things that speak to different communities about mental health and other aspects of health in general. It's just taking the time to find those materials. And a lot of times they're either free or inexpensive to stock an office with those. And so just having something that visually speaks to somebody that may come from those backgrounds to pick up and be like, oh, I didn't know this. Like, it's more inviting for the educational piece. And so I would say that's part of it. And just, I mean, reputation is everything, I feel like. And especially with mental health care, like, people will look for somebody that understands the communities, and they'll be like, hey, do you know anybody that works well with the Indigenous, Black, or Latinx, or the queer community? Like, do you know somebody that works well and I won't be microaggressed there? Do you know somebody that's not going to question everything about my existence in order to be treated? And so just like helping people understand, not through just like the visual representation, which I think is a big step, is like showing that you took the time to have that in your office or on your webpage, like links about things. It can go a long ways, but so can like people finding out that it's a place that they will be welcome in their whole selves.
Often we see, I know when I worked at a local mental health authority, I worked at a few, they do, these resource fairs like once, twice a year. My thing is like, it's not in the communities that actually need them. You're going to places where people have access to these services. They're insured. There's not people who experience language barriers. We're not sending people out. We're not going out into the communities that really, really need to get this information and really see that we care. Another thing is, I'm very big on not infiltrating communities. Like, if you're going to send someone out, make sure that it's someone that they can relate to, that maybe might look like them, speak the language that they can resonate with. So like you said, Dr. White Bear, they can say, I feel comfortable. This is a place that I want to seek help at. I want to go. I want to learn more. Another thing is I completely understand that, people want security. They want at their buildings, but often we see that there's police and people get really, really scared, especially those communities that have experienced issues with law enforcement. And we're seeing that a lot. It's more prevalent, all over social media. People are pulling their phones out and recording, so on and so forth. So I think what is big is just providing that patient education in all languages, material that people can understand. Often I see brochures and I'm like, I've been in the field and what is this? Like, this is just too much to read. Like, it's just like overstimulating my mind, or like, why are they wording it like this? Like, it's too much. So really making materials that people in our communities can relate to, they can fully understand and fully get a grasp and scope of the services that are being provided to them. The next question, we have 2 left. I'm so excited. In minority populations, we often see a misconception that if boys or men or people who identify as men openly speak about their mental health or seek help, they're labeled weak. They're viewed differently by their community. Why do you think that is? And how can we end this stigma? How can we help normalize mental health care?
Okay, so what I believe is really stems from how we raise our children. So we can see the difference in how people respond or how parents respond to the way either boys or a girl falls down. When a girl falls down, we say, are you okay? What happened? Let me see. We put a Band-Aid on it and everything, right? When a boy falls down, we often see that parents react with, okay, get over it. It's just a little scrape. Stop crying. Stop exaggerating. So I think more than anything, these discrepancies or these problems occur from how we allow our children to express their emotions. And so if we're able to, when they are younger, allow them to express themselves, that if they are feeling pain and if they are crying, allow them to cry. Tell them that their pain is valid. Tell them that what they're feeling is valid, that their sadness is valid. And therefore, they can go ahead and when they grow older, if they experience trauma, they will be more able or be more comfortable in disclosing the trauma that occurred and in talking about their experiences. And so just us as a community, on the internet, when we see men being belittled or men being put down because they are showing emotion, for us as a community to just stand up and say, he's a human. He has emotions. He is allowed to feel pain. Just stand up for these individuals.
When I heard this question, I'm thinking about like the way that toxic masculinity operates, and for folk who don't understand that terminology or haven't heard it before, it's about the way that society creates norms and expectations around boys and men that are based a lot on how it was just described, like this concept of like boys don't cry, man up, be a man, those kind of terms. And like, that like just gets to me so bad whenever I hear that. I was like, what does like not showing emotion have to do with being a man? And it's really funny, interesting. Like, I'm just going to make a cartoon reference right now. Like, and it's a Disney cartoon that a lot of people I don't think watch that much, is like Brother Bear. They talk about that. He says, what does love have to do with being a man, is one of the lines in there, when it's about him understanding love and compassion. And I really think that's why that movie didn't get as much play as it should have. Because it pushes back on that expectation and how toxic masculinity works, and as a form of control. And like this question, like I get a little bit emotional thinking about, because it has like huge damaging repercussions, right? Not just in how men and boys process their own emotional needs, but the outlets from it too, like whether it shows up in abusive behavior or whether it show up in other ways like suicide. And so my nephew died of suicide last fall, and it had a lot to do with some of these things about like people picking on him and calling him a girl, not understanding why he showed emotion, not looking at and all kinds of other stuff that had to do with xenophobia and anti-indigeneity as well. But it all had to do with bullying based on what other boys considered how they should treat each other, and the lack of accountability by parents and adults in the community to let that behavior continue. So like if you see that happening, the repercussions are devastating when a child takes their life because of it. And one of the things my sister is really big on is not letting his death be like for nothing, and for people to understand like those are the repercussions of not just bullying, but how we condition men and boys. And so being able to talk about emotions is a really big thing, and being able to support men and boys that are having a hard time, like, it can go a long way. It's just that simple thing of saying like, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be like, exhibit like what people would consider feminine. Like it's okay to embrace compassion. It's okay to do these things and push back on that societal norm. And that's like a big lofty thing, right? Like to ask for us to deconstruct something that's embedded in society, but it really needs to happen. Like it absolutely needs to happen. Men and boys should be able to talk about trauma. They should be able to talk about if they need help, to be able to reach out and not be belittled. And a lot of times that's what happens. And that's why there's like a huge disparity on the sexual assault reporting for men and boys too, is because people don't believe them a lot of the time, or they feel like they're going to be less of a man if they explain what happened. And so that's where it's all interconnected with that. And it has to do a lot with like the way that this country was founded as being like male dominated, and particularly like cisgender straight male dominated, and the conception of like what it means to be brave and what it means to be a protector or provider of something, and its expectation all on them, and like not recognizing like women were strong, women had leadership, women were warriors too, and that didn't make men any less than them. It was like a balanced out thing, right? And this is like not just here, but on other places too. So for me, this is like a really personal question to answer, but also like it has to happen. Like we can't keep losing people because we can't talk about these things.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your family. I think you definitely touched on very, very much valid points. We see it time and time again. I think people are not very much aware, but women have high rates for attempted suicide, but young men and just men in general, they have the highest rate to actually complete suicide. And that speaks volumes, and why we don't talk about that as much is beyond me. I know in the Latinx culture, it's very much machismo. You don't talk about anything. You're supposed to be a provider. You stuff everything down. You don't talk about it. And that's that, you know? But like you said, it's okay to cry. It's okay to have feelings. It's okay to discuss your feelings. And I think what is also so hard is our men and our young men, who do they have to talk to when the people in their community, not women, because usually, most of us are more empathetic, but when they're trying to share with, their homeboys, their friends, their father, their uncle, they're being told like, man up. Like, I think of that George Lopez, he always says, why are you crying? Like, why are we doing that? We are causing more hurt than good. We are perpetuating the stereotypes and stigmas. And often people just don't click and they don't realize that. So thank you, Dr. White Bear, for sharing that. Thank you, Margot, as well. We definitely need to make sure that our men, our young men, those who identify as male, because that's a big one as well. I feel like they are left out a lot of the times, that they deserve proper, mental health care. Our last question, I want to thank you guys just so much for just rocking with us and doing this with me. LGBTQIA plus individuals are more than twice as likely as heterosexual men and women to have a mental health disorder in their lifetime. In 2009, according to the American Psychiatric Association, more than 30% of transgender individuals reported contemplating suicide. Many LGBTQIA plus individuals report experiencing stigma and discrimination when attempting to access mental health services. Some have even reported being told by mental health professionals that their sexual orientation and identity is a mental health illness, when that in fact is not true at all. What kind of education do we need to provide to our communities and professionals to end this stigma? How can we show acceptance, support, and solidarity to our LGBTQIA plus community?
I think, like Dr. Whitebear earlier mentioned, it's checking of those biases, checking for these mental health providers to check their biases. If they have a bias against this population, the LGBTQIA plus community, then, they need to themselves get mental health counseling, right? Because there is problems there. Why do they have these biases? And so that they also do not work with these communities and further, traumatize these individuals. I know that many of the current mental health professionals at the moment, they studied the old DSM criteria, and so homosexuality was a mental illness at the time. So these mental health providers just need to be educated, and in the case that they do have these biases, get mental health for the biases that they do have.
I would say, first of all, that people just need to not be bigots, right? So there's that part. But also, like, if people aren't willing to treat somebody that's part of the LGBTQIA plus community, or that's from a different racial or ethnic background than them, they probably shouldn't be in the field at all. Like, literally, they should have no business in the field, because the number of people that are not open because of fear of their life with their sexuality or their gender is higher than people probably realize. And they're probably treating somebody that identifies in this way and causing them more harm than they realize. And so that's my opinion on it. But also, I think as far as education wise, like, knowing these statistics is really important, but also understanding, like, there's also differences depending on what community you're in. So if you're looking at in the LGBTQIA plus community, the people that have the highest rates of suicide are actually Indigenous youth within this community. That's where it lies, in youth, not in particular, not adults. And there's a lot of reasons for that have to do with settler colonialism and the attack on gender identities and sexualities within the Indigenous communities. And so that's where it becomes this internalized oppression where people are being biased against their own community members because of what's been taught to them by basically colonizers. And so that's a big part of it, is like understanding like there's historic reasons why the rates are so high in communities, and understanding that is really important. So not just knowing the number, but knowing the story behind the number. Like, where did that number come from will help you understand like how to address it. And so I think for communities, I would say to just accept each other. Like, I always tell people that are biased in my own family, I call them out on it quite frequently and say like, hey, quit being transphobic, quit being homophobic. And they're like, I'm not either. I was like, actually what you said is. And so like telling them, and they don't understand, like, oh, no, I'm not, I'm okay. I was like, no, you're not. Listen to what you just said and understand like you're hurting people within your community by doing that. And instead of accepting them and supporting them. And I've told people too, like, what harm does with their sexuality or their gender, what harm is that causing your life? And they can't answer that question because it's not harming her. Their actual life is not being harmed or threatened by somebody's gender or sexuality. And so that's where I would ask community members that may not agree with that to say like, to really think about that and try to explain to themselves like what harm it causes them personally, and think about their actions moving forward from there. And it just needs to really come down to be more loving and accepting. And I think that's like then the overall for each question, like just be more loving and accepting of each other, and stop trying to force your own stuff onto other people, your own traumas, your own internalized stuff, and how it manifests into like the horizontal oppression that we exhibit in our communities sometimes, that just needs to really be addressed.
And I want to go ahead and retract what I said, and I feel the same as what Dr. Whitebear said, is if you have this bias against this community and somehow this affects you in that way, then you might not be in the right profession as a mental health worker.
And I think we're just seeing that across the board, right, with everything. I think there's very much a paradigm shift that we're seeing right now with the social injustice that we're seeing time and time again. We're seeing, people shedding more light on Indigenous women who are being murdered and missing. We're seeing more light being shed on children who are being detained against their will. We're right now, our generation, or the generation right now, they're speaking up. They have said enough. And I think what Dr. Whitebear said, love and acceptance goes a long way. And I think if we learn how to love one another and just show that solidarity and support, it can really make a big difference in someone's life. I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to the LGBTQIA plus community is seeing what this community already goes through. Sometimes, their family members don't accept them. They have lost their mother, their father, their siblings, friends because of who they genuinely are. And then they go and seek, whether it's health, or mental health care, and then they're being told that what they identify as or their sexual orientation is an illness. And that's far from true. So then we're just furthering the traumatic experiences that they have and just causing more trauma to them when we're supposed to be a guiding light for them and be showing them that love. I think if anyone has any issues, whether it's anti-Blackness, you have issues with the indigenous, Latinx community, LGBTQIA, you just shouldn't be treating people, period. Because we all have a code of ethics that we should adhere to. And that means that we provide the best care for anyone, despite their race, their sexual orientation, their ethnic background. their religion, so on and so forth. So I really, really thank y'all for the answers that y'all provided today. I don't know about y'all, but this was really insightful and impactful for me. I feel so honored to have been able to interview Miss Margot Martinez and Louis White Bear. And, you know, I just hope that everyone who, you know, views this and sees this is able to get the information that they need so they can provide, you know, informed consent. They can feel more comfortable seeking, you know, health or mental health care, and that they see one of us and that it resonates with them, that they see themselves in us. So thank you so much for taking your time to meet with me. One of my mottos is Amor y Esperanza, love and hope. So I will leave y'all with that. And just thank you so much. Y'all are just two amazing women that I look up to. And it was definitely an honor and a pleasure today.
Thank you very much. A huge pleasure for me as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
No problem. And I hope to see you guys soon or interview y'all again.
Sounds awesome.